a wise man in the form of a pretty pissed off board member one meeting gave me this stark warning that I will never forget. And he says, never grow the business faster than your ability to effectively manage it.
Why do growing businesses go broke? Welcome to the Profit Answer Man podcast. I'm Rocky Lalvani, and I help 7- and 8-figure business owners scale profits and cash flow while working less. Every week, we dig into proven methods like the Profit First system, other cash flow strategies, and real execution. No accounting jargon, no fluff. If you're going to be the backbone of America, creating jobs and serving your mission, you deserve to be well rewarded. We're Profit First certified professionals. If you want the masterclass, check out episodes 2 through 13, including Mike Michalowicz, where I break down the entire Profit First book, chapter by chapter. If you want, grab your free copy of the Profit Blueprint book at profitcomesfirst.com and start making profit a habit today. You built this business to serve your mission and your freedom. Let's make sure it pays you back. We also offer strategic tax planning and preparation to help you keep more of that profit. Now let's dive in. If scaling and growing your business is starting to feel chaotic, it's usually not a revenue problem, it's an execution problem. Today, I'm joined by Aaron Trahan. Big goals don't build big, great businesses. Great systems do. Aaron's mission is helping leaders build a bridge that connects vision to strategy to execution using systems that scale. His approach was shaped by real-world lessons from scaling a billion-dollar consumer company, and it led him to design a business operating system focused on the 5 fundamentals that determine whether growth becomes momentum or chaos: prioritization, communication, organizational focus, accountability, and execution. I love these concepts because they're the very things that we work with our clients on. Today, we're going to break down what a sustainable, scalable business really requires so that your team can execute sharply and your leadership is aligned and your business grows without breaking. At the end of the day, it should be easy, lucrative, and fun. And if it isn't, let's help you get there. Welcome to the Profit Answer Man, Aaron Trahan. It's great to have you join us today.
Hey, Rocky, thanks for having me.
Excited for the conversation. Can you share a little bit about yourself and your business?
I sure will. Let me kind of take you back to, I think everybody loves an origin story. So let me kind of take you back to mine. And, leadership in growing and running a business happened much earlier in my career than I ever would have anticipated. When at the ripe age of 24 years old, I was kind of thrown into running $100 million annual revenue division for a business. And so, me learning how to lead and run and scale a business was kind of a sink or swim moment for me. So I needed to learn how to swim very, very fast. And that's kind of eventually what led my career into the senior executive ranks and, taking over a publicly traded organization with $1 billion annual revenue run rate. And all that really means was I think I've made just about every possible business growth and scaling mistake that a young leader could make. Luckily, I was able to learn from them. There were no catastrophic mistakes in there, but it gave me a great blueprint to really sit back and reflect on what were the things that I wish I would have had then that would have saved me from all the mistakes, all the heartburn. And now my job is to really package up those lessons and allow businesses and business leaders to take advantage of those things with the kind of systems that I put together that I wish I would have had back then, so that they can take advantage of those learnings without having to acquire the same scars that I had to acquire. And so today I work directly with businesses and its leaders, really around helping them sustainably and efficiently scale. I think we all talk about scale and business growth, and that can mean a lot of different things. And not all growth is good, as a lot of businesses ultimately end up collapsing under growth that can't be manageable. Me having personal experience there, I want to save businesses from going through that same hardship.
How did you end up in that position at 24?
So I interned with a company while I was going to school. And it was just, I could tell you about how great I was at strategy or operations, but it truly was kind of a right place, right time. It was a very, very lean organization. So a lot of its leadership, they really put a lot on their plates. As an intern and kind of worked my way into a young manager role, it was a pretty intense environment where the only thing that mattered was execution. And so, as you could imagine, a lot of MBA hotshots that would come in just had a tough time surviving the culture. Me, it was the only thing I knew. I didn't know anything different. I kind of learned and grew up in an environment where execution and world class execution was the standard, and you executed no matter what. And so it was really a next man up type of scenario where my boss ended up leaving, the replacement ended up leaving, and so it was a critical time for the company. They were kind of figuring this kid knows enough. Let's throw him in there. Let's he can keep things afloat until the next we find the replacement. And I knew that that was my opportunity. I not only wanted to step into that role, but I wanted to keep the role and did whatever was required to make sure I performed to be able to stay there.
Lucky break, and then you made something of it. So that is totally awesome. One of the things that I find most business owners do is thump their chest over their revenue. And I've constantly said revenue is vanity. What do you find to be the most important metric for a business?
Yeah, it really is the follow up question. And that is what happens to that revenue, right? And so, look, the markets have changed quite a bit, right? In 2021, you could see a lot of even public markets. If you had a high growth rate, you were probably being rewarded with a great multiple, were able to go out and raise funds and, yeah, keep the party going. Well, we're operating in a different type of party now. And it's not so much about how much revenue or the rate of revenue growth that a company experiences. It is what happens to that revenue. How much of it falls to the bottom line? So is your profitability performance on par with your revenue growth performance? If not, if there's a major gap there, and then you factor in cash flow, are you able to generate cash from your growth? And so those are kind of like the three scales that I help businesses really balance because so many times, I'm sure you've experienced it, a lot of your audience has experienced it. People can grow their way into insolvency. I cannot tell you how many small and medium sized businesses go from record revenue months to 30, 60, 90 days later, stressing on how they're able to make payroll. The revenue growth is not efficient because the gap between revenue performance, profitability performance, and cash flow generation performance were all over the board. So if your revenue is not able to fall to the bottom line and generate oxygen for the business that is cash flow, I help businesses sit back and analyze, why are we growing this fast and this inefficient when it's just going to create problems down the road, if not today?
Do you find most business owners pay attention to this? Do they know to look at this, or do they have to get the sucker punch first, or like when does that aha moment come?
Yeah, and I think that is the crux of the problem. It is not on their radars. They're operating, at least for a lot of the businesses that I've seen. And look, this is also coming from personal experience, being not an outside observer to some of these businesses, but being inside some of these businesses, that there's a belief that revenue growth cures all illnesses. If we just grow to this point, if we get to this level, then everything kind of works out. When in reality is if you grow the wrong way, it creates far more chaos than it does solve problems. And so revenue growth is the furthest thing away from it curing all the illnesses if that revenue growth is not efficient, if there's not profitability performance to follow, if that revenue growth is not generating cash flow from the operations. Some growth can completely absorb all the cash. And then therefore, yeah, you've grown your way into a cash crunch, which happens so frequently with a lot of small and medium sized businesses.
It does. I keep banging the drum. I'm just glad someone else is too. So
Yeah. And I think, too, Rocky, to your point, it always shows up when I start engaging and working with a new business. I ask them to show me how they're measuring these things. And back to your question around, do businesses acknowledge this? They'll show me their revenue. They'll show me the breakdown of revenue channels and category revenue and how much advertising is being generated to create the revenue. But when you then go and point back to, well, how correlated is your revenue growth to your profitability growth? You get that deer in the headlight type of look, right? It's like, well, we really don't look at it that way. We hope that the revenue, once all the smoke clears, falls down and creates profit at the bottom line. And so I said, so if you're growing revenue at 30%, but your profitability is flat or unchanged, where are the alarm bells to sign off that there could be danger in the future? Because the revenue growth is, in some cases, in that particular instance, could be burning cash more so than creating more cash.
and this is why we look at absolute dollars, but we
Mm-hmm.
also look at percentages. Because when revenue is growing and dollars are growing, if you're not looking at the percentages for gross profit, net profit, and everything else, you can't tell that your margin's constantly being compressed until it's too late. And so you have to follow the trends by looking at the percentages to see, is my gross profit increasing, decreasing, staying the same? And how does my gross profit compare to all of my overhead costs and everything else going out the door? I think too often when businesses scale, they scale everything first except the revenue. And then they're always playing catch up to that. And if the revenue doesn't scale like they thought it would, they find themselves behind the eight ball.
Yeah, and I kind of like to use the analogy that, look, you can read about scaling a business, and there's no shortage of information on there. People promising you the world around helping you scale, on Instagram or LinkedIn, whatever it is. But you really got to understand, what is scaling, right? Is your business creating operating leverage? And part of the bubble that I unfortunately have to pop for a lot of business owners is, how much is your growth costing you? If it cost you $1 to generate one extra dollar of revenue growth, I got bad news. That's not scale. You're just treading water. And so where are you finding the opportunity for 25 cents to generate $2, $3 of extra revenue? And if you don't know that, it's actually in your best interest to slow down, figure that out before you try to grow any further. A wise man, in the form of a pretty pissed off board member, one meeting, gave me this stark warning that I will never forget. And he says, never grow the business faster than your ability to effectively manage it. And that's all around. Not all growth is good. If you don't know what your growth is generating for you in the form of profitability and cash flow generation, or arguably it's not generating those two, better performance in those areas, have the discipline to slow down and get your house in order before you just create a bigger house fire.
And I think that's key. When you look at businesses, you've got 5 critical areas that determine a business's ability to grow and scale. Can you lay those out?
Sure. I'll think about this in terms of a waterfall. And again, these are all lessons I learned the hard way, but every instance where I've been part of a business that successfully scaled, a scenario where we went from 200 million in revenue to 1.5 billion in revenue. And, these things were in place. We were effective in these 5 areas. But consequentially, when I see businesses that were on a growth track and then get knocked off of that track, and they were a once promising scalable company that's now no longer a growth company at all, one, if not all five of these areas showed up as a weakness. And at the top of that waterfall is around priority management. I can't stress this enough. I like to use the scenario with CEOs that I work with of I ask them, when's your next leadership meeting? When does that occur? And they'll say, oh, Tuesday at 9 a.m. every week. I say, great. Let's think about this thought experiment. I'm going to show up to your next leadership meeting unannounced. I'm going to secretly go around the room. I'm going to ask everybody around the table these two questions. What are the top three priorities for the business? And why are these the priorities right now? What would happen? 9.9 leaders out of 10 have about a 3-second pause and they say, you're probably going to get different answers from a lot of people around the table. That must be solved first because this is where the waterfall starts to cascade. You've got to get prioritization management fixed first. That then allows you to clearly communicate what the top priorities are. That's the second step. Then and only then are you able to unlock the superpower that any organization has, and that's focus. So as an owner, as a founder, as a CEO, how do you harness an organization's focus behind the right things? You got to get those first two steps right. Your priorities got to be clear. They have to be effectively communicated. That then gives you organizational focus. Then it becomes a management exercise. Once those things are in place, step 4 is execution, and then 5 is accountability. I call these the golden 5. I have yet to find, and maybe your audience can challenge me on this, I've yet to find a single example of an organization that demonstrates effectiveness in these 5 areas and fails. If you have an example, serve it up to me. I'm sure Harvard would love to do an MBA case study on it, but I've yet to find one.
My only thought is if you get step 1 wrong, the rest of it's going to fail. Meaning, while you might pick 3 priorities, you pick the wrong 3 priorities.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you prevent the wrong priorities from being picked?
Yeah, look, I don't think we live in a utopia. I think it's fair to assume you're going to get that wrong sometimes, right? And so as long as you have kind of long-term goals aligned with short-term priorities, priorities can change. They can be recalibrated. I love the Jeff Bezos quote where he says, stay stubborn on the destination, but be very flexible on the path to get there. Just because you set a priority today doesn't mean it has to be the priority, forever. And as long as you're able to, back to step 2, effectively communicate if there's a change, why was there a change? What did we get wrong before? And how are we going to apply those learnings to better prioritization moving forward? You can keep the rest of the waterfall intact. But you have to know what you're trying to achieve, what milestones are required for you to get there, where do you need to execute on and by when to kind of stay accountable to making progress towards that goal. And so look, prioritization it's hard. We're talking about this at a high level, like it's easy to say, but every business owner that's hearing this knows this is really hard to get right. My only advice is you're not going to get this right every single time, but you got to be a quick learner of what you got wrong, calibrate quickly, communicate while you're calibrating, and reprioritize to kind of get you to that stubborn destination you've set for the organization.
And I very much agree with you on the essence of the theory. Hey, we've got to pick our destination. When we stick to a particular map, we get ourselves in trouble. You have to be flexible on the route because, as you've said, and as happens in the world, things are constantly changing. And so you do have to be able to adapt to it. And when you're rigid in that, I think you set yourself up for a lot of failure. But at the same point, you've got to hold to, what is our true North Star and what are we getting there? How often do you notice they change these priorities that they're working on? And what is a proper time frame for that? Because you could be changing them weekly. Most business owners are challenging them daily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem, right? I think when When an organization has too many priorities, which just means nothing's really a priority, or you're giving the organization whiplash around priorities changing too quickly, I think it's kind of a Goldilocks scenario, right? You don't want to be on either side of them, of having too many priorities and or changing too quickly. So the system that I live and die by, and I've been just an avid proponent, is with objectives and key results, of really using this for a quarterly prioritization sprint, right? Because it's one thing to have a five year long-term goal, but you've got to be able to break that down into smaller chunks. And so what does 2026 success definitions look like, to where you can unequivocally feel this is the progress we need to make by the end of the year to be on track to that longer term goal, and then keep forcing priority in the short term that aligns there. There's going to be some change. You're never going to get this 100% right. But if you're able to work within kind of a system driven format that's going to give you a feedback loop, it's going to give you learnings and give you the ability to calibrate. Yeah, I think you don't want to have too many priorities. You don't want to be changing them every night. I've always liked the quarterly sequence, is the best cadence and rhythm that I've encountered personally.
How much time do they devote to setting their top 3 priorities every quarter?
Yeah, I think it varies, but I don't think it's something you rush, and that's what we kind of settle on. I think it's the more that you try to rush it, if you're not allocating the right amount of strategic thought, you want to be able to be as right as possible, knowing you're not going to be right every single time. And so I think making sure that the short-term priorities align with medium and long-term goals is the most important thing. And what I help organizations do that's been most effective in this planning process is why now stress testing, right? Because there's going to be things that show up along the way. We know owners, founders, CEOs, leadership teams, it is very easy to chase after shiny objects. So when we're prioritizing something, why is this the most important priority right now? This quarter, this cycle that we're going to harness focus behind our organization on. Can we clearly communicate why this is important now and how this sets us up in quarters ahead to achieve those medium term milestones? I think it's a game of connecting the dots, the short term to the medium term to the long term. And I think you want to give yourself I've seen some organizations, carve out up to a week to do this. I've seen some organizations carve out longer. Some organizations like to do a 3-day retreat. Give yourself the space to let these things breathe, to be stress tested, to be debated. These should be where some of the healthiest debates in an organization come from, in my opinion.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I find most business owners are too busy to work on the business. And then they wonder why they're too busy.
Yeah, and Rocky, I'm sure you've seen this, back to kind of where this conversation started. How many times do they just default priorities down to a revenue growth target?
They default priorities down to the fire in front of them. And the fire in front of them occurred because they let it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't build what you kept talking about as systems to prevent it, or a culture to make sure that it's not what they do.
Yep.
You keep talking about systems. Do you have a favorite system, or have you created your own, or what does that look like?
Yeah, kind of a hodgepodge, I guess you can call it, of systems that I've seen work really well as some that's been internally created. And to really make this real for an organization, we can talk about the vagary around short term, medium term, long term. Look, 5 years out, not a whole lot you can do to action on that, right? So something that I've found is kind of what I refer to as the sweet spot of where I start from a system planning process is what I call the 24, 12, 6, and 3 protocol. It's where I like 2-year planning. I found that to be long enough out where you can generate some inspirational change, some really understand how you want to go from current state to ideal state. But if you're going to set that long term 2-year target, it's got to be backed up by the dependencies and achievements that need to occur in the next 12 months, which you can then break in half to now say, where do we need to be at the halfway point of the year? So, what's our 6-month milestone? And once we get down to the quarterly, the 3-month, that's when we activate the OKR process to really lock in what needs to be prioritized, focused on, and executed on at a high level over the next 3 months. That gets us where we want to be on track for our 6-month target. That if we achieve that, we're on track for our 12-month target. And so now that 2-year mini vision that's been set up, you've now got a clear milestone based system to make sure you're breaking that down into actionable chunks that can keep progress going and allow you to be where you need to be. Because that's one of the problems. So much strategic planning is too far out in the future that lacks the connection of short-term priorities. And you talk about the pivots or the mission drift or everything else like that. It's because there's too much looseness between where we want to go long-term and what we're focusing on and prioritizing in the short term. So this is a way that containerizes the connection between short, medium, and long. And then we use a very proven system of objectives and key results to execute at a level the organization's probably not used to executing at in those short-term time increments on a quarterly sprint.
And I'm a big fan of the quarterly sprint. I think it's long enough to make a difference, but short enough that you don't put it off. You give people too long a time period, and just like a kid waits to the last day to do their book report,
That's right.
it's the same concept. It comes back to Parkinson's law. So when you have that tighter crunch, it puts the focus on and it forces people to keep on track and to be able to do that. And even if you fail and it takes you 4 months instead of 3 months, it's not the end of the world. You still made a tremendous amount of progress. What are some of the biggest issues and mistakes you see as people scale and grow?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to 3 big things, especially around scaling. And look, I've had several adventures inside organizations that were high growth, but wildly inefficient, where we thought because we had a high growth rate over a period of time, that must equal scaling, right? Well, it didn't. And here's the 3 big lessons that I kind of learned from that unfortunately I had to learn the hard way. Number 1 was kind of the message that I got from that board member very early on in my career. And it's to never grow faster than your organization's ability to manage it and maintain a consistent level of execution. The second that your growth is diluting your ability to execute, somebody has to be the adult in the room, pull the fire alarm, and say, we've got to slow down to increase our execution. If that doesn't happen, there's a lot of very high profile examples of what happens when growth outstrips your ability to execute and organizations collapse under the weight of growing pains.
So people are afraid to take their foot off the gas because they think if we slow down, we'll lose our momentum, we'll lose everything, and it's kind of like giving up.
Mm-hmm.
And so they keep growing till it breaks.
Yep.
Is that just human nature? Do you have a way to get them under control?
Yeah, it's the business version of the dopamine hit, right? When you're growing and you're looking at those numbers going up, even if it's not converting into profitability and cash flow, growth in a business is the most addictive drug on the planet. Don't fool yourself any differently, right? And so my counter to that is when growth continues, but your execution suffers, that's actually a faster path to the graveyard than slowing down. And have you heard of the Inc. 5000 rule?
No, I don't think so.
So Inc. 5000, Inc. magazine publishes this list of the 5,000 fastest growing private companies in America every year, right? Every small and medium-sized business wants to be on this list. They want to market this. Who doesn't want to say, I'm one of Inc. 5000's fastest growing companies? Well, believe it was about a decade ago that the Kauffman Institute and Inc. magazine did kind of a where are they now kind of follow-up study of what happens to companies that make this list. The findings were staggering. Keep in mind, these are the 5,000 fastest growing companies in America. What they found was 68% of those companies that make the list either fail outright or are no longer a growth company over the next 5 to 7 years. And so for this notion that a lot of businesses have because they're stuck on the dopamine hit that the growth provides, that we got to keep growing, even if execution's suffering, I think all the data points point otherwise. Your lack of execution will be the very thing that prevents you from being able to sustain growth. And most businesses die of suicide versus homicide.
This is kind of bringing me back to the story where you started. And it seems like, because if you think about it, for most business owners, especially the smaller ones, as they start to grow, it might be their first time at growth or their first time really experiencing that level of growth. And they don't know what they don't know. And yet the concern is always, how do you get them to listen or to learn before they make the mistakes themselves? And it seems like a lot of them are hell bent on making the mistakes themselves.
Yeah. I think there's an incredible validation that comes when you see your business growing. You forget about all of the things that might be happening and why your business is growing in spite of some of the things that you're doing. And it's not all because of everything that you're doing. How I like to stress test this with the businesses and the clients that I work with is, let's forget about the rate of growth for a second. Take me into what's driving the growth. Help me understand if your business is growing 10%, 20%, 30%, I don't care what the number is. How are you able to sustain that? Fast forward out 12 months. What will you do? What is working so well? What is your value proposition? Where are you providing value and delighting customers at a level that your competition can't, that makes this sustainable? What I often find when we shift the conversation to sustainability and how they're going to compound this growth, the story starts to break down pretty quick. If you go out and spend a bunch of money on advertising, your advertising spend is up 50% year over year, and that's driving 10% growth. Is that sustainable? Like, show me what you're doing that's making your growth sustainable. And let's break it down to its simplest form, because that's the kind of the second golden rule is growth has to be sustainable. You have to be able to compound on top of it. And if you're just doing a lot of advertising or marketing, or it's very transactionally driven, I would like to say that that's more of a sugar high than it is a sustainable fuel source. Avoid the sugar high growth. It feels good. Those dopamine hits show up the same way, but you got to fast forward out. What is giving you that solid, clear vision of what you're doing today can continue to be compounded and sustained on in the future? That's where I like to really break apart, because what I find, I would say probably 7 to 8 times out of 10, that's the rationale that I'm provided of why their growth is sustainable is as flimsy as wet cardboard. It doesn't, and sometimes it doesn't even make sense. And it's a real eye opener to the business of saying, how are we going to sustain this? Was this a COVID pop? Was this, an advertising strategy? Like, Is the growth part of a short-term wave that we're riding, or did we really cause this?
Those last things that you said were things I was going to mention to you
Hmm.
because we saw a whole lot of businesses experience this, and not just small businesses. Peloton got a COVID pop, and they thought they were going to be selling those bikes forever. They started building factories. They blew up.
That's right.
Even some of the technologies to go online, like Zoom and all of those,
Zoom.
blew up. But then people want to go back in person. Travel has been a roller coaster, and where people are going has been a roller coaster, and it keeps changing. So, and then the other one is even just marketing or newness, especially for a newer or smaller company. When you first hit the market, because you're new and novel, you tend to get a bunch of people who might try you, and they think that that growth rate's going to continue. What they find though is they got all the easy pickings. To get the next round is more difficult, costs more money, requires more effort. And if they didn't serve the first round well, they don't come back. And so all of these things, but yet human nature kind of makes us believe that this is the never-ending merry-go-round. And so we just kind of keep following it, which
And that's some of the most impactful conversations I have with businesses of treat me like I'm a skeptic, like I'm a critic of your growth. Prove to me how this is sustainable. What are you seeing that makes you believe you can maintain or sustain this level of growth 1 year, 2 year, 3 years out in the future? Show me how your value proposition is so dialed in and so dynamic that you're creating a moat around the business. Those conversations open up insights that it's very tough to get without. Those are just challenges that can't happen with employees within the business, right? And it just opens up so much around there. It's almost kind of like, have you heard of the concept of red teaming? Kind of was created in the military, and it's just a process at which you really stress test and challenge the assumptions that sit underneath your thesis. And so just red teaming, the assumptions are around why what they're doing is sustainable and will be able to be compounded and will be able to be a consistent leverage point for the business. It usually falls apart in less than 15 minutes.
You know, it's funny. I think my two biggest strengths are perceived weaknesses. Number one, I bluntly tell them the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone wants to hear the truth. But if you want to know the truth and you want someone who's going to call you out and show it to you, then we do that. And the second thing is I manage risk. And what I mean by that is I look out at the future. I want to see all the risk points. I want to put them on the table, not to say that, hey, then we can start to evaluate. What's the chance of that happening? Oh, 1 out of 100. Well, we probably don't need to worry about it. What's the chance of that one happening? 50 out of 100. Okay, how do we change the odds from 50 to 5 or 10? Or how do we have a plan B that we know when and how to pivot? And honestly, for me, I think one of the biggest ones that comes into play for small business is they're always trying to hire a new marketing company.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, when are we pulling the cord that this isn't working? And how are we going to measure the results? And what are they telling you are going to be what do they say are going to be those numbers? Because if you don't ask the questions, it invariably drags on. And what I struggle with is not all business owners want to know that. And I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me. But for those that do, it sure prevents a lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah, that's why if you're not, and this is also kind of what happens, like what does that dopamine hit of revenue growth give you? It makes you think you've got it all figured out, right? And so when you're running a growing business, even if it's not generating operating leverage, even if it's not generating profitability, the growth has a way of impacting learning, right? I see a lot of business owners that develop a tendency to listen to the things they want to hear and become allergic to hearing the things that they most need to hear to manage risk, to think about sustainability, to think about, is this level of growth this way in this area right thing for the long term? Um, so yeah, it's kind of like who who do you have around you as a business owner that can challenge the approach, challenge the assumptions, stress test, is this the right thing? And then will that business owner, founder, CEO, will they have the humility to listen and actually take in the insight? And if your explanation of why your growth is sustainable falls apart in 10 minutes, are you willing to go back to be leaving the expert hat on the side of the table, putting on the student hat, and learn what you need to learn to make sure your business is a sustainable scaling organization?
And I think there's always a way forward, but you've got to think through it instead of muddling through it and hoping for the best. And it shocks me how many business owners are allergic to profit. But, at the end of the day, you got to make money. And
yeah, and I think it's a false belief, right? It's they're allergic to profit today based on the hope that if we keep this growth coming, the profit's going to show up later. Guess what? When they reach that later, something funny happens. That profit never really shows up, does it?
No. And I can show you businesses at 10 million, 20 million, 50 million. Same problem.
Yeah.
Because they didn't build the business model and the systems and processes right, like we started with. When you do it right, the cash starts flowing, or you understand that you are in what I call a constrained business model where the cash is slower than the growth. And what we do in those businesses is we take a step. We wait for cash to come back, catch up, next step. It's just the model. And either we figure out how to change it or we work it the way that it naturally works. And that's all you have to do. It's all solvable when you take the time to look at it instead of running around in emergency mode all day. That's all.
And I'm glad you brought up the Peloton example, because I think there's probably, at least in recent history, I'm not sure there's a better visible example of what happens when a company does not properly stress test its sustainable growth trajectory.
Well, but there were so many others that happened, and I think they happened behind the scenes in 23 and 24. If you think about it, clothing dramatically shifted during COVID. And then it dramatically shifted again 2 to 3 years later as things changed. Buying patterns dramatically shifted. I forget when it was, but I can't tell you of how many stories I was hearing of major retailers. They were selling their containers on the ship, undelivered to the United States ports at pennies, because the market shifted and all that stuff was in transit. And then the tariffs came and then it went a whole different direction again.
That's right. Yeah.
And, you just have to be ready and you have to keep shifting. And that's all you can do. You have to keep your ear to the ground and know, hey, these are the potential things that might happen. If they happen, how do we react, pivot, and move? Because those who do will thrive and survive, and those who don't. Don't.
As the great Andy Grove has always said in the title of his book, only the paranoid survive. If your strategic planning process only incorporates all of the good things that can happen and what a best case scenario looks like, if you're not prepared for worst case scenario, you're really not that prepared.
No.
And so understanding and having a deep appreciation around what can go wrong, the probability of that thing going wrong, And what can you do today to minimize that particular scenario? That's what great leaders do.
One of the simplest ways I find, have a crap ton of cash in reserve. Solves a lot of problems and gives you time to think and pivot.
Well, it's the follow through to where the quote you started earlier. It's like revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is king, right?
Yep.
I don't think the team at Berkshire Hathaway is having trouble sleeping at night right now because of their almost $400 billion in cash they're sitting on.
And it took him time to get there, little
That's right.
by little, slow and patient, and that's what he did.
Because the growth is compoundable, it
Yep.
was sustainable, and because of it all ties back to what we've been talking about.
It very much does. If people would like to learn more about you and how you help, how can they find you?
LinkedIn is definitely the place that I show up to the most. And so I'm a pretty frequent sharer of insights there. So feel free, connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out. Would be happy to set up a follow-up conversation. And I try to provide as much value there as possible. And for a more detailed kind of roadmap of what and how I really help, you can visit my website, which is performancemindsetcoaching.co.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Rocky.
If there's one message to take with you, it's this: growth only counts when profit and cash flow grow with it. Revenue by itself can feel great, but if execution is slipping and cash is getting tighter, that's your sign to slow down, get aligned on the top priorities, and rebuild the systems that make scaling sustainable and not drive you to bankruptcy. Big thanks to Aaron for sharing the Golden Five and how to connect vision strategy to execution. If this gave you value, share it with another business owner you know who's pushing for growth and could use clearer, calmer path to scaling and profitability. Tired of scaling and growing beyond your cash? Ready to end the cash flow roller coaster and build real wealth inside and outside your business? We should talk. I serve 7 and 8 figure mission driven business owners increase their profit and cash flow while working less. We help you build the businesses that run without you so you work less and make more. Book your discovery call today. There's a link in the show notes. You'll work directly with me as your Chief Profitability Officer. If you're a 6-figure business owner, check out the Profit Blueprint program at profitcomesfirst.com. It's your guided path to mastering your numbers with my assistance at an affordable investment for your revenue. Check out my other podcast, Richer Soul. It covers leading yourself and building the ultimate life in business. There's also a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to the podcast, where revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. Have a profitable week.